for our last installment of Backcountry Beta, last installment for the season. In a perfect world, we would be doing this every single month because that means that we would be skiing every single month, but we aren't doing that. We're slowly making the transition into spring, summer, which isn't the worst thing if you ride bikes, but also it's time to start crying a little bit that we're losing winter. But at least we have one more event tonight, and really excited for our guest. And I'm going to turn it over to Catherine, who will be introducing her and giving you a little idea of what we're going to be talking about tonight.
What's up, everybody? I am Catherine. I work at TREW Gear running our operations and other stuff. And first, I am really excited that this is a little group. We were just talking before the meeting started and just thinking that this was going to be a really cool topic to have a small group in so that we could really get into the nitty gritty and talk, have Ginny, who talk about in a second, but we can really dive into your questions and particular items that you want to hear and learn more about. So this is going to be really cool. Anyways, enough about that. Let's talk about Ginny. So Ginny White is our event lead tonight. She is a true athlete who we've been working with and who's been repping our brand spectacularly for, I'm not even sure how many years, like
4 or 5 now? Yeah.
Either way, she's been doing it long enough where she is like one of the veterans and is just, you know, we rely on her to just go out, get footage. She shreds. She's also just one of those genuinely awesome, smiley, stoked, positive people. And she has also recently been pursuing a career in the outdoors, both in ski guiding as well as kind of the snow science realm, hence why she's here tonight, and has officially become a forecaster. So that's kind of the tip of the iceberg, but I will let her take it from here.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Super excited to be here. It's awesome that it's a small group because this topic can kind of like go down a lot of different rabbit holes depending on what people are interested in. So this will be awesome. Like Catherine said, I'm Ginny White. I've been with TREW for 4 or 5 years now. They've been super supportive of me and just pretty much leave me to my own devices to go skiing and do whatever I want. And yeah, this year I kind of took another turn and did my Canadian Avalanche Association Operations 2, which is basically like the Canadian forecasting course. It's like a 10-day, very elaborate course in which you just learn about so many different things from like group management and human factors and team dynamics to like the nitty gritty of snow science and crystal formation and all of that stuff. And then passed my 6-day exam. So now technically I'm an avalanche forecaster, which is kind of crazy to me, but here we are. So yeah, today it can kind of go any way. Like if people have questions, speak up in the chat, like raise your hand. And we'll kind of just like let it flow. Basically, snow science is the deep nitty gritty of what goes on in the snowpack, from all of the processes from when it snows to what's going on within the snowpack, from the ground up, from the snow down, and all of the things that basically go into creating avalanches. So the beginning, pretty much I'll just like start from the beginning. Like, where does one start when like wanting to get into snow safety or snow science? Is like, I'm assuming you guys all know what the avalanche forecast is and have your local ones that you tune into and you check what's going on before you go out into the backcountry. And so basically the baseline of forecasting is building that public forecast. Hi, Trisha. And so, yeah, you kind of want to start there. We take all of the inputs to build the North American Avalanche Danger Scale, which I'm sure you guys know all about. It's the scale that gives you your low, moderate, considerable, high, and extreme avalanche ratings. You guys all know what that is? Yeah.
I think you could probably speak a little bit more to that for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
why don't
that'd be cool.
I'll pull it up and we can kind of go through it, because that's what we all look at every day before we go out. And that's like, if we don't understand that, then it's kind of hard to like even get deeper into snow safety. So let me try and share my screen here. There we go. Is it working? Are we sharing? There we go. We're sharing.
Yes.
Look at us go. So you pull up your forecast, you see this, and you see kind of like your avalanche problems for the day. So as a forecaster, we use this to determine what's going to happen in a day. And then you guys also look at this to determine how safe, quote unquote, or unsafe it is. So low avalanches, generally safe avalanche conditions, that's going to be zones where there's always the possibility for avalanches when you're in avalanche terrain. And avalanche terrain is basically anything over 30 degrees to like 45 degrees that is going to shed snow on you. And so we look at this to basically determine how dangerous it's going to be that day. So the likelihood of avalanches and the avalanche size and destruction, that's basically our avalanche risk, our like hazard for the day. So if we see, the most common ones we see out there are moderate and considerable. And a lot of people, I think, don't fully understand like the consequence of considerable avalanche hazard ratings. They see an orange, they're like, oh, it's orange, kind of a neutral color. It's dangerous, but it's backcountry skiing. It's always kind of dangerous. But considerable avalanches basically tell us that we're going to have up to size 3 avalanches, which could bury a house or a train car or like a small village. So that's a huge amount of snow in specific areas. So if we're going out and we look and we see the avalanche hazard is 3, 2, 1, a classic like alpine tree line, below tree line, then we're going to have a pretty high chance of having large natural avalanches that will bury a house on specific features. So basically, when we build a forecast, we're looking at what those specific features are and what snow conditions are going to create that. So some examples are, hold on, let me just get back to our meeting here. Zoom, how do I get out? Uh-oh, there we go. I'm doing it. There we go. Too many screens open. I'm losing.
You did it. You got it.
Here. There we go. I'm out. I'm free. I'm free from the screen share. So yeah, basically that's our hazard rating for the day. And we, as forecasters, basically we start at a very large scale and we look at the weather inputs on a super large scale, and we break them down into a micro local scale to determine what's going to be happening within the snowpack that specific day to create or not create natural avalanches. So I'll just pull up a couple other things here.
Ginny, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I really appreciate what you just said about the considerable, because when you pulled that up, that graph, the first thing that came to mind for me was it's so, I would say, normal and acceptable here in the Sierra and the Tahoe Basin to ski when it's considerable. And I was just curious if you could maybe get into that a little bit more as someone who clearly has so much more education than those of us who have an Avi 1 or Avi 2. Like, and you did just speak to it in the sense of like, it could take out a house or a train car, but like for you personally, when you see considerable, like how do you feel about that? And what are you doing about that? Because it's such a normal thing to ski considerable here. And I always wonder, I'm like, well, it's still orange and there's 2 exclamation points. 2.
And like a big powder cloud.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I see a considerable avalanche hazard, I like immediately take a big step back from like anything I was planning on skiing that day, to the point where I will determine, you're looking at your forecast, you have considerable avalanche hazard. I look specifically into the problems that they've given for that day. So say for that day, they've forecasted a wind slab up to size 2.5 to 3, let's say, which that would be a huge wind slab. But let's just go with that. You've got wind slab and you've got a deep persistent slab. Those are your 2 problems for the day. So from there, if we're forecasting for natural avalanches up to size 2 to happen, I'm going to immediately step back and probably almost not ski any avalanche terrain that day. So if you have a deep instability, that's generally going to be everywhere in the snowpack, especially like in the Sierras. You have a lower snowpack and larger gaps of time between storms, which gives you time to build up those weak layers in the snowpack. And the generally lower snowpack is going to mean that you're more likely to trigger that as a human or just from inputs from the weather than if you have a twice as big snowpack like we would on the coast or something like that. So I would immediately, with a considerable avalanche hazard, just take a big step back and probably avoid almost all avalanche terrain. I would ski in the trees. I would ski lower angle. I would just kind of take like a more gentle approach that day. Versus if you had a moderate avalanche hazard, I would look specifically at the problems that are forecasted for that day. I would find areas that those problems don't exist. So say it's a wind slab, we generally have winds from the southwest. So we have wind slabs on the north and like northeast aspects of the slope. So the wind comes up from the south, deposits all the snow on the opposite side of the mountaintops. And so I would avoid all of those slopes that day. And I would ski something on the windward side, something on the southwest side that hasn't been fully loaded with that snow, and that avalanche problem doesn't exist there. So it basically all circles down to, looking at your forecast, and then I'll dig into a little bit more later on, like how you can take that forecast and go out and like determine those factors for yourself if those problems do or do not exist there, because the forecast regions are pretty large. And so it's hard to take that and then go out and be like, well, I'm not seeing this. What do I do with that? So yeah, basically considerable is that's kind of my like red flag of hazards. Does anyone have any questions about that? No? Perfect. So basically, yeah, once we look at our forecast, we look at where our problems are, and you guys as the general public, you only have access to so much information based on what we're like in Canada, what Avalanche Canada is giving you as a forecast, in the States, like what the Colorado Institute or whatever your local forecast is giving you. So that's when you kind of want to take some things with you when you go out. Not that like, because you're not going to ski when it's considerable avalanche hazard, obviously. Like, you guys live in areas probably where that happens often, and you're not going to ski when that happens. So you have to be able to identify those problems where they exist and kind of how to move on with that. So like I was saying, avalanches basically are caused by weak layers in the snowpack that happen during different weather changes. Those main weather changes are a change in temperature, an increase or decrease of wind, and sun, basically solar radiation. So the first one, wind, like I was saying, you get the creation of wind slabs or the movement of snow from one side of the slope to the other side of the slope, taking snow away from one side and moving it to the other side, where it creates these super, super densely tiny packed particles that are going to create a thick slab layer on top of a lower density slab layer. So anytime you have a denser, heavier piece of snow on top of a lighter piece of snow, you can have an avalanche, because you have a distinct layer between the snow that's gonna not bond together. So wind is one of our main factors that we look at. Change in temperature. So with warmth, we can have an increase or decrease in size of those snow grains on the surface, which can then create melt freeze crusts. So you get the snow kind of loosens up in the heat, and then as it refreezes, you get a melt freeze crust that's going to be like a smooth, hard surface that creates another layer for the snow to slide on. Eula has a question: what is the difference between wind-loaded and cross-loaded slopes? So it's the same thing. They're both loaded with wind from snow coming from one direction to another. Cross-loaded is generally the wind is coming from a different direction than normal, or it's coming from one direction and it's blowing snow instead of like up and over the peaks and down the other side across the slope. So you'll have like one similar aspect that on one side you're going to have not as much snow, and across it you're going to have a deeper slab where that wind has moved it across the slope versus up and over. Yeah, sorry, Trisha, I'm located in Nelson, BC, so I'm a Canadian representative. I know a lot of you guys are American, so like some of the specific American-based like resource questions, I'll probably send to Catherine, but true Canadian up here. Yeah, so some other things that are going to cause a slab in the snow is solar radiation. So you have shortwave solar radiation coming in from the sun, and that's going to melt those particles, and you can get melt freeze crusts on there. It kind of gets, there's like, you can go so deep into the different metamorphosis processes that are happening in the snowpack that are just like, literally like my brain breaks trying to think about them. So we won't get too deep into that, but there's kind of like, how many here, we'll ask because there's not very many of you, how many of you guys know like the hardness scale of like the snowpack? If you're out there and you're like touching the snow, you're like, oh, that's like fist, that's 4-finger, that's 1 finger. Are people familiar with that process? Jen, a little bit. Okay,
Thinking like mostly no.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a really good place to start when you look at the forecast and they're saying that we have these problems on these aspects. You're like, okay, well, maybe I'm not going to ski west aspects because that's where the wind slab problem is happening today, or that's where the storm slab problem is happening today. So you can go out and you're like, okay, we're going to ski on a different aspect, lower angle in the trees. And you can, for yourself, try and determine like the density of the snow. You generally want lighter snow up top, nice and light, soft, full of air. It's not very heavy. Increasing in density down to the ground to like really thick, heavy snow that like us as humans are not even going to be able to like penetrate, like super thick. Increasing, you imagine as it snows all winter long, you have added pressure and added heat, and that added pressure and heat is what creates rounds, which is the snow crystal that we want in the snowpack. They bond together, they love each other, they're super tight knit. Once they're together, they stay together. They're the crystal that we don't have avalanches with. It's when you have kind of like heavier over lighter and those different layers that you can get the different snow particles that are going to cause weak layers in the snow that cause avalanches. So some of those layers involve like facets That's a square edged crystal that is formed during periods of cold weather. So if you have long, cold, shallow snowpacks like Jen has in the Sierras, the cold air and the space between the first crystals gives it space to create edges, and those edges don't like each other. They don't bond well. They're not tight. They just are like loose, big units that are gonna fail within the snowpack if you get a heavy layer on top of it. Surfaceor is another layer that we have that's not a round crystal that is going to create a weak layer in the snowpack. Surfaceor also created during cold, clear periods overnight. And it's basically like the radiation at night, the long wave radiation, the heat is leaving the snowpack, and you get dew that evaporates out of the snow. And because it's cold and clear, it freezes on the surface and creates like little feather crystals. And that's what Surfaceor is. And they stand up, they're tall, they're beautiful, they're stunning to look at, but they're super strong. Like, you know how if you put a book on an egg like this, it doesn't crack? But as soon as you put like a cross pressure, like a slab avalanche sliding on that surface, they all fall down like a bunch of dominoes. And so that one is one of the other main crystal forms that we keep an eye out for that creates a lot of avalanches. There's like those, and then Depthor, which we won't get into because it's like so niche. It's one of those things that it's basically like large facets at the base of the snowpack that if you're in the Rockies or the Sierras or somewhere with a low snowpack, you have large square crystals at the bottom of your snowpack. And that's when you get like full depth avalanches in the springtime, or in the Rockies, even like midwinter, where you have a failure of the whole snowpack on like really large crystals at the bottom. So if you're going out and you're like, okay, we're looking for a storm slab, which is basically when the storm comes in, brings lots of snow, adds weight to the snowpack, and it's generally going to be a different density than the snow that is already there, depending on the temperature it comes in at, if it comes in with wind, and what snow is already on the ground or the surface when the snow falls. So the ideal storm starts warm and cools off through the storm, because then you have smaller crystals underneath, which is basically like less dense crystals with less dense over more dense crystals. So you have a lighter snowpack on top of a heavier snowpack. Whereas if the storm comes in cold, the snow's nice and light, it's airy, it's nice and loose crystals basically, and then it warms up, they come in really dense, and then you're going to have heavier snow on top of that lighter snow, and it's going to fail. That heavier snow is what's going to create that failure in that storm slab. So if you go out after a big storm and you're looking to see kind of what the slab is, you can do like a little pit. You take out your snow shovel, you dig just like a little hole the width of the shovel, and you can just like put your hand into the snow and feel for how dense it is. So the scale, it's really quite simple how like general the terms are, but you've got your fist hardness, which if you put your fist into the snow, there's like no resistance to your fist. You've got forefinger, which is your next one, which you take your gloved hand, you put in the snow if it's like resistant to your four fingers, but if you put your fist in it, it wouldn't really go anywhere. That's your forefinger. Then you have one finger, which you literally just push one finger into the snow, and if it's resistant to that, then you take out a pencil and you push a pencil in the snow. And then your ice forms, like if you have a really solid melt freeze crust, then you have a knife, and that's your knife resistance. So you want your snowpack to start at fist and go down to basically pencil at the ground. And that's the ideal snowpack. It's like, it's beautiful, it's light, it's soft, it increases in density to the ground. But we obviously don't have that, and that's where our avalanches come in. So we have layers that you'll go from fist down to like one finger, and you're like, oh, and then all of a sudden there's an ice layer because you had 3 weeks of sun in the middle of January and it got super hot, which didn't happen here at all this year. Which is exactly what we had here this year, and it was insane. Like, it was like spring in early January, like 10 degrees in the Alpine. It was unbelievable. So we had like probably 5-10 centimeters of like ice crystals at the bottom of our snowpack, because it was like end of December, early January when we got that, and the whole snowpack is now based on that ice form, which is like pencil thick and like can break down through the season, but will generally remain and kind of like lurk until the springtime. Nice. Thank you, Catherine, for that that video. That's awesome. Does anyone have any specific questions about like how to identify different types of slabs in the backcountry? All right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So there are terms like when I'm reading and I'm not sure I always what's a gropples?
Okay,
What is a
grauple.
gropples?
It's basically like a piece of hail. So it's like a snow form that falls from the sky and just like gains, it goes through different layers of cloud that add precipitation to it. So it's like a snowflake that has rimed up, basically. Do you know what rime is? Yeah. So it's like a snowflake that's fallen through the sky and has collected rime on it. So it's like a fuzzy little golf ball that's not as dense as hail, but is still like a round, heavy form. And that's another form that can be persistent in the snowpack. You get a big grauple layer and they're just like ball bearings for the next snowpack, the next snowfall to be on top of. Does that make sense? Right on. So yeah, basically when you're out there, we're looking for weak layers under the storm slab, which is going to be larger crystals or a big change in temperature during a storm. If a storm comes in really hot, you're going to have a different size snow crystal. If it comes really cold, you're going to have nice, light, dense snow on top of those other layers, which is what we want. Some like yellow flags that I look for when I go out there, if I'm like, I look at the forecast, I'm like, okay, these are my problems. This is where they're located. Is it there? Like, are we seeing this? A lot of the times you'll have a storm slab, which is like that new fresh snow that generally will come in with a different temperature. So it has a different texture and density than the old snow. And it will bury a layer of Surfaceor. So like it's been clear for, could be 2 days, it could be a week. It's been cold. Those Surfaceor crystals have been allowed to grow because every night more moisture is fed into them and those feathers just grow into the sky. And then you have a layer on top of that. So the main thing I look for when it first snows is the grain type. So I'm like, okay, I've got this much snow on top of, they say it's on top of Surfaceor, the problem. So I go out there, I kind of like, I do my little hole. It doesn't have to be a huge hole, just enough to like see what's going on. Some of these persistent layers are so visible that like, if you just like clean a little window into your snow, you'll be like, oh, there's a Surfaceor layer. It's like a 1-inch layer of like beautiful, clear, you could like see the sun through it. So I'm going to be looking for that grain type, the grain type that they say is out there. And maybe it doesn't exist where you're skiing that day. Maybe you look and you're like, you know what, I'm not seeing Surfaceor here, but you're finding a crust. So what you'll sometimes have is Surfaceor generally likes to form on like north aspects in the cold, in the shade, it like thrives. And at the same time, when it's cold and clear, on your southern aspects, you're getting a lot of solar inputs. You're getting a lot of solar radiation. So at the same time, on those southern aspects, you're going to have a sun crust, which in itself is a different layer for the snow to slide on, but it maybe is not Surfaceor. So you go out looking for a Surfaceor problem, and you're still having avalanches, or could have avalanches on that layer. It's just maybe a different thing. So you want to make sure you're going out there and you're looking for a change in grain type. You don't have to know like the specific details of like what each one looks like. You're just looking for those like distinct changes and like a very obvious change in that snow form. So yeah, Surfaceor and facets, so those are persistent. They're going to pretty much stay in the snowpack throughout the whole season until either a big avalanche happens on them or springtime when you get the whole snowpack melting and freezing every night in what we call like a spring diurnal cycle. The other thing is grain size. So this is where it gets you'll have to be like a little bit more specific and you'll need some tools. So if you have a change in grain size from your new snow to your old snow in over a millimeter, which doesn't seem very big, like a millimeter is super small, that is enough to have not enough bond between those new layers to create a sliding surface for that new snow. And then hardness. So you go out and you're like, oh yeah, everything's nice and soft. It's all fresh. It's beautiful. It's like fist. And then all of a sudden it goes to like pencil. It's like super stiff, super firm. That's also going to be something to look out for. So basically, if it's like more than one hardness between a layer, it doesn't like progressively change nice and slowly, then you can have avalanches on those surfaces as well. Does that kind of make sense?
This is so awesome. Like, I feel like all my like Avi 1, Avi 2 from all these years ago is coming back to me, and I'm just soaking this all. Thank you. This is so good.
Oh, good. Yeah, because it's hard because it's like, it's very specific, but also like to try and just like break it down into like a general thing is kind of hard. So it's good for me too, because then I get to talk it all through. Yeah, so you're looking for those persistent grains because the majority of fatalities that happen with avalanches are going to happen on one of those persistent grains, whether it's Surfaceor, Depthor, or facets. And those all occur when there's like a large change in weather that's like stagnant for a period of time. And then wind. So you'll get a wind slab that will generally, we say they'll last like 24 hours after a storm. And I'm not good at conversion, but it's basically like you have your scale that's like light, moderate, high winds. Light winds are like 0 to 20 kilometers an hour. Moderate winds are 21 to like 45 kilometers an hour. And then high winds are 45 to 60. Anything above that is considered extreme. But all it takes to create a wind slab is a moderate level of wind. So anywhere above 20 kilometers an hour, which would be what Catherine, like 13 miles an hour, something like that, 13 miles an hour or over, that gives you enough transport to move 3 to 5 times the amount of snow you were supposed to get in that storm. So say you were supposed to get 5 centimeters, and where there's no wind, you have 5 centimeters of snow accumulated. You're like, that's nice, a fresh little like boot top day. With wind, you could have up to 25 centimeters of snow accumulated. So you have to keep in mind, you're like, oh yeah, we're going out it was only 5 centimeters, it's not going to make a big difference. Like, we don't have an avalanche problem. If you had even just like a couple hours of sustained 20-kilometer-an-hour plus winds, you could have up to 25 centimeters of snow in those wind deposited areas, and that's going to catch you off guard. Because all of a sudden you're skiing along and you're like, 5, it's great, everything's fine. And then you're like, oh, I'm actually in a 25 centimeter slab that's now avalanching around me. So wind is a big factor when it comes to avalanches because it has such a large impact so quickly. If wind comes in warmer than the air temperature has been, it has the ability to warm the surface of the snow and even melt it and create a sort of like sun crust or a temperature crust just through that warm wind. And if it comes in really cold, it has the ability to cool the surface of the snowpack and change the top layer. It'll like change the density of the snowpack. So wind is a big player. Pay attention to what's going on. That's something you guys can do at home really easily once you've looked at your local forecast. I'm sure you guys are looking at what the weather is going to do for your day out. Pay attention to what the winds are doing. If you have access to like any sort of like Department of Transportation weather plots or your ski hill weather plots or whatever, they'll generally have a something that will tell you the wind. If you can look at the wind for the last 24 hours before your day out, that's going to tell you a lot about where the wind is coming from, how strong it's been, and how much transfer you could have in that storm. So wind slabs, basically, they just go away on their own. Once the wind subsides, they'll kind of, with just like a general winter conditions, they'll kind of just like soften up on their own and disappear within like 24 to 48 hours after the wind event. So you want to pay attention to them for the next day or two after the wind. And if you get a snowfall again on that itself could be a sliding surface because they're super tight particles that have just been like thrown at each other and just like demolished into tiny pieces that are hanging onto each other. So they do go away, but they'll take a couple days. So you want to keep an eye out for them for a couple days after your storm.
Can I ask you another question, Ginny?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can this just be a me and you Q and can we just do this?
Yeah, we could just do this all day.
Okay, great. Thank you. Also, I just want to encourage everybody, like at any time, if you want to like unmute and ask a question, you certainly can do that. There's no like rules around it. But so one of the things that when you were just talking about like all the different weather and that, like another thing that I think about is how when we transition out of winter into spring and backcountry skiing in the spring, I feel like we have this idea of like, oh, it's spring backcountry skiing. There's less to worry about. It hasn't snowed in a bit, like, and you're just, you're thinking about going out and like getting that corn cycle. And it's, and I'm just curious if you have anything to say about that in terms of like mentally, like thinking about what we should be thinking about spring skiing or anything that, because I just feel like just like the considerable thing, like you see considerable, you still go. But then also spring skiing, you're like, oh, it's spring skiing. But it's like, certainly I know there was an awful avalanche here in the Sierra, like down on the Eastern Sierra about 8 years ago, where a couple was killed in an avalanche in like, May or June, right? So I'm just curious if you have anything to say about that, like, because that's the sun, how it affects things. And if you could talk about spring avalanche versus like that. We think of avalanches like it snowed so much. And so the avalanche comes from that, but then it does happen in the spring as well when you haven't had new snow in quite a while.
Yeah, totally. So springtime is kind of a funny one because it's A, when a lot of avalanches will wake up, and then B, also when sometimes you can have the safest avalanche conditions for doing like bigger things, like if you're into, as the Americans say, couloir skiing. Or
how did the Canadians say it?
Yeah.
Couloir.
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 So couloir. Couloir. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
There
Wait,
you
how
go.
do Americans say it?
Say it?
Couloir.
I say I never actually say it out loud because I don't know how to say it.
You don't, do you say the L?
Couloir.
Yeah, there you go.
Couloir.
You say it like a Canadian.
Nice.
Jen says it like an American. It's like couloir.
Couloir. I mean,
Yeah.
Couloir.
I am an American. Also, I see you other Americans on this call. Don't act like I'm the only one who says
I know
Couloir.
they're hiding out from you.
They are hiding. They're just like, oh, she's
One just popped out.
I definitely see
Two
myself.
more popped out. Couloir. Okay.
Anyways, that was just a
Yeah.
subtle dig. But basically people get really excited about spring skiing due to the fact that we have conditions that it warms up so much in the daytime that the entire snowpack will melt or become like moist. And then at night it refreezes. So all of those layers of concern that we've been thinking about and like analyzing and like dealing with all winter long, all of a sudden are not an issue because that whole snowpack has melted and then refrozen together. So the issue with spring skiing is people get really excited about it when the days get longer and we're not in a full spring cycle yet. We're still in like full winter conditions where it maybe just hasn't snowed in 3 weeks, but all of those layers in the snowpack that we've been worrying about are still super present and even could wake up more so with that increasing temperature in the daytime without a full refreeze at night. So if you get enough heat that reaches down to those layers, all that snow on top of it could potentially slide. Whereas like full on spring, like I don't know when it happens, like here it happens like May, where it like the whole snowpack will warm up and then at night it will all freeze. So you've got that prime time to like harvest corn, which is generally like from noon to 2, where it's like perfect. It's like just soft enough. It's not ice, but it's not slush. And then like if you miss it, you know when you've missed it because you're skiing in like wet, sticky, like elephant snot. It's just like a bad time. So it's kind of funny where it's like spring is amazing because you have longer days, you've got these refreezes that happen, but people generally get a little bit too excited about it before it's a full thing. And we have longer days, but we still have full winter conditions in the snowpack with added heat, which when you add heat, you're going to change all those bonds that are happening between everything. And you're going to start waking stuff up, especially deeper in the snowpack. And so what probably happened with those June avalanches is they were probably out too late in the day where the whole snowpack then started melting again. And you have massive, like full depth avalanches that are detrimental. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's actually that was a great question. Oh, we got one more question.
Yeah.
Before we jump, Terry, sorry, hold on one sec. We have about 10 minutes left. So I think this is kind of a good time. If you do have questions, I know we have Terry lined up, but throw your questions into the chat and we can kind of take this time to do some Q&A. And then we can also have Ginny tell us a little bit more about, if we have our AVI or AST1, how do we keep progressing this knowledge and learn more? But yeah, Ginny, I'll let you tackle Terry's question.
Yeah, so when this whole snowpack is melted, when it's like, when you have those conditions later in the afternoon where it's like fully just like sticky glue and it's warmed up all day, you can also, this is something you can check on your local forecasts, your local weather forecasts, is if you have like a temperature chart in your local forecast, you want to see it going below 0 all night and then coming back above 0 in the daytime. And if it's not going below 0 at nighttime, you're not getting a refreeze and you're going to have the whole pack. Celsius. 32
Fahrenheit.
32.
Couloir.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we pronounce that 32.
Yeah.
Just so that everyone knows. It's
32.
32.
32.
32. 32.
Yeah, but basically like to kind of wrap up and just like send you guys down a path to like find out more. If you want to start like digging around in the snow, the basic tools that you're going to need is a crystal screen, which you could get at your local REI or Catherine, where else? Any of your local like
Yeah, you could probably
snow
get them
sports
online at Evo
outlets. Yeah.
yep.
So that's gonna help you determine the size of the crystal and the type of crystal, because it just provides a grid that you can put the snow on and you can look at it and it tells you what size it is and it gives you a platform for looking at it. The next thing that you're gonna need for that is a loop, which is basically just a magnifying glass that you then look through at your snow crystals to see what they are. It's like, do they have edges? If they have edges, they could be facets. Are they like feather-like crystals? It's probably Surfaceor. Are they just like a bunch of round, nondescript things? They're probably not of concern. So yeah, a loop is going to help you determine that, and then a ruler. A ruler, just to tell you, if you have a probe, you can just use your probe for this also. It tells you how deep the snowpack is. It's like a very simple, easy tool. You're going around, you're like, oh, we have a deep instability. I wonder where it is. You put your probe in the ground, you can feel changes in density and you can feel where those crusts are. And if, say, yeah, you have a deep persistent slab that's near the bottom and it's supposed to be like a knife, like ice crust, and you're putting your probe in and it's just like same resistance, same resistance, same resistance, then you're like, oh, I don't think that crust is here. And then maybe you could dig a hole and see if it actually is there. But it's like a very simple, basic tool. You just put your probe in the ground, find out how much snow you have, and like what's kind of happening just without even looking at it. It's awesome. But if you want to get more detailed, then you could get a 1 meter to 2 meter ruler to like find out exactly how deep all those layers are. But pretty much like find someone out there who knows a little bit more than you. Honestly, that's how I started, is just like, I never wanted to be the person in the group with the most knowledge, and I still don't. Like, I love learning from other people. So find groups of people to go into the backcountry with who know more than you do. And they can just teach you little tips and tricks here and there that you can just absorb and find out what you like that can then relate to your forecast, so that you can kind of understand the forecast a little bit more on a local scale if it is or isn't happening directly where you're trying to go skiing. And online videos, YouTube is awesome. There's like literally thousands of pages of scientific papers that will tell you about every single thing in the snowpack that you could ever imagine. Like, if you just Google like snow metamorphosis, you could go down rabbit holes for the rest of your life about how Surfaceor is formed. And then courses in Canada specifically, it's, without going down a professional path, it's actually quite difficult to like find courses on this stuff. Where I live, Kootenai Backcountry Guides does a Snow Science 101, which is really awesome because it basically takes everything I talked about today into like a couple-day course. And it takes like all the skills you learn in your AV1 and just like deepens them a little bit.
They're a woman-owned company, aren't they?
I
Backcountry?
do not know. I don't think so.
Okay,
Maybe a
I know
different
it's a
one.
bunch of guys that guide there, but I thought it was a woman who owned it. Maybe I'm wrong.
Oh, maybe
Okay.
you could be right.
I don't know. I'm South
Yeah.
Purcell, so I got nothing.
There you go.
You're Kootenai.
So
You're-
close though. So
Yeah, so
close. Yeah, so just find people. Ask your ski patrollers. They like, I'm sure they're quite nice. Be like, hey, what did you guys find in the snow today? Like, what's going on with the weather? Just ask people questions. Ask the internet. Ask Jeeves, you know? Yeah, and then if you do end up like on a path where you want to go more professionally, in Canada, the Canadian Avalanche Association is pretty much the only place to do it. You go from your operations one, which basically lets you be a tail guide and kind of gives you all the basics of like a simple, basically the pre-forecaster, like how to dig a snow pit and how to read the weather and all that stuff. And then honestly, like if you have like a local college or something that does weather courses, everything we do is so dependent on the weather and being able to figure out what the weather is doing. If there's gonna be wind, if it's gonna be warm, if we have a pineapple express, we call them atmospheric rivers now, like all of this stuff that's just like understanding the weather is going to help you understand what's going on in the snow and like why all this stuff is happening so much better. Yeah, we still have a couple minutes if anyone has any other questions.
I
There you
like,
go.
I'll just jump in if no one, does anyone
Get
else?
in there, Julia.
All you.
So I live really far from my like avalanche forecasters, my avalanche forecast station. Like
Yeah,
they're
totally.
a decent distance from where I am. Sometimes, you know, other forecasts will be closer to what we're seeing when we go up and out.
Yeah.
So I, you know, I rely a lot on like min reports and things like that from other people who've gone to similar areas from me. And I, you know, I try to like verify what they see, but I find it so variable. And I find that it's so hard when you're up there and you go to verify what the conditions are and you find something different.
Then you're like, hey, then what? You're like, is this good or is this bad?
Yeah, and then you're just like, and you know, so I don't know. I just maybe can commiserate, and I don't know if others in the States have the same sort of thing, but it's really like it's nerve-wracking, and this has helped. Like, thank you so much, because
Oh yeah.
you know, like in AST1, we don't learn how to dig pits here in Canada. It's not
No.
part of it. It's about risk management and decision making, AST1.
Yeah.
So this has really helped me kind of get a little bit more knowledge on that.
Yeah,
But,
and like the next, like in AST2 is really good. That's where you're going to dive more into like the digging of pits and the different tests we have to determine the like likelihood and probability of avalanches. And that's what basically goes into creating the forecast. So from there, you might have a little bit more confidence digging a profile and being like, okay, like this is what I have. This is what's different from my forecast, but in a good way. Like I don't have this, say, like that's the issue with all of the forecasts is that they're for a super broad area, and in all of the regions that we live at, it's like we have very discrete like microclimates. They're gonna have totally different problems. Like the forecast could tell you that you have a persistent slab in the alpine and at every elevation, and then you're like, oh, it actually, our freezing level was 1,000 meters lower, so we don't have that deep persistent problem in the alpine, you know. And so you basically just have to, yeah, like find like resources, take an AST2 to go out there and be able to be like, oh, we don't have that problem here. I'm still going to take note of what the forecast is saying because they're professionals and they're doing their best on a very broad scale. But to be like, oh, I'm going to ski this aspect, even though the forecast said that the likelihood of having storm slabs or a deep persistent slab there is high. Right? So it's basically like, it's hard to have the confidence to make those decisions. Like it's difficult to look at the general forecast and be like, okay, I'm good to go now because I looked at the forecast. You just have to go out there and like feel it and go out with people who are as curious as you or like have a little bit more knowledge and just like, yeah, just like get your hands and feet in the snow and see what happens.
Sweet. Well, we are right smack dab on 6 p.m. So nailed it on timing, and I hope everybody had a good time. Yeah, obviously this is a very complicated, nuanced, just expansive realm of knowledge, and this is just a teeny little glimpse at it. So Ginny, thank you so much for talking us through, and just, I don't know, you did such a great job, especially not even, having graphic and visuals. Like,
I know, I felt bad. I was like, oh, it's just gonna be me talking. I don't even have art behind me. There's like nothing to look at. Here we are.
But yeah, no, I think it's really awesome I know I've been able to kind of watch you progress and move along and kind of figure out where you want to go on this journey called life. And I hope everybody else kind of tags along on your adventures. And she is on Instagram. Check out TREW Gear. We post about her all the time. And yeah, in general, I think we've learned a lot, and we've got a lot more to learn. So I'll probably be up all night just digging into more stuff that you mentioned. So
Yeah, totally. And yeah, Terry just said, how do you identify a good or not good weather forecast? Honestly, it's just one big guessing game. So like look at multiple, look at many. Like, I don't know if you guys, we have this thing called Spot WX. You could basically just it gives you a map. You just click on it and it will take all of the weather forecasts and like models and merge them together for that specific area on the map. So like a lot of the places we want to go skiing, there is no weather forecast for that exact location. Spot WX, you just click on the map where you're going and it will give you a merged computer model weather forecast for that specific area. And then just like compare, look at lots of different forecasts and be like, oh, I like this one the best because it's giving me more snow.
I want to echo what Catherine said. Ginny, thank you so much. This was so wonderfully informative and wheels turning. And thank you for everybody who's here tonight. And just know that this is recorded. We'll put it on YouTube. It'll go in the clubhouse. So if you want to revisit it, just go over to the Backcountry topic and you'll see it there. And as we mentioned at the beginning of this call, this is the last Backcountry beta for the 21-22 season. This is it. Catherine and I need to rest.
It's rest season. It's rest season.
Ginny, anybody who works in snow sports, it's like this wild thing where you get into a career, into a profession, into something you love, and then you realize you work all the time in the season that you actually just want to be playing. So it's this weird. And so by this time, that push and pull, you're like, all right, I'm ready to just try to go ski some things, and I need to rest. So we'd love to hear from all of you. If any of you have feedback about what you'd like to see in the future, whether it's Backcountry Beta, a different iteration of this, but TREW Gear and Coalition Snow, we're kind of, Catherine, I don't know if you know this, but we're kind of doing this. And we'll always be here to put things together and serve this community. So feel free to reach out to myself or Catherine. We're both in the clubhouse, and you can DM us, or you can always leave a comment. And then also Julia and Heidi, who are on the call, are Coalition Snow ambassadors. So feel free to reach out to them if you ever have any questions or want to give feedback about anything. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. Ginny, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing all of your knowledge with us. Everyone just got that was I don't know, you could do this YouTube professional and charge some monies. So
there you go. That'll be if I didn't need rest, then maybe I would do that also. Yeah.
There you go. There you go. All right, everyone, have a wonderful night. Thank you so much for being here. We'll see you in the clubhouse, and keep those fingers crossed for snow, because we still
spring storms. They're coming. It's
happening.
Gonna happen. Yeah.
They're going to happen. All right. Bye, everyone. Have a great night.
Bye.
Thank you guys for having me. Same goes to me. If you have any questions, DM me, whatever. I'll send you snow nerd links anytime.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.
Yeah.
Bye.